and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve Knight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today's show, we're talking about the 6 property pathways, 6 different ways you can actually invest in property. Now, we've talked a lot on the show about new versus existing properties, which is better. Should you renovate? Should you hold? But here's the thing, I still get questions from people saying, I don't know which strategy I should use when investing in property. I understand the technical differences between maybe new and existing. I understand that if I need to renovate, there are the 6 cash flow hacking steps I can use, but how do I actually figure out which path I want to go down? And so what we've built for you guys is a nice spreadsheet, which I'm going to show for all of you guys watching on YouTube, for everybody listening to the audio version on the podcast. Of course, we will describe it, but we're going to take you through the different ways you can invest in property so that you're able to make that decision. Now, Andrew, can't believe I'm doing this. I'm going to hand you the keyboard and the mouse. So what are the kind of 3 main strategies that then each have 2 options of how you do it?
So there's the buy and hold strategy. So buy a property, hold it for 20 years, sell it. There's the renovate, which is if you're buying a property and then doing some renovations to it. And then there's development. So actually buying a bare site and putting a number of units on it.
Now, each of these different strategies have 2 different ways you can go about it. So let's start with the buy and hold, where you just buy something, don't do anything to it, and hold on to it. What are our 2 different ways to do that strategy?
So there's the new build and there's existing properties. So anything that's been lived in before. Then with renovations, you can buy, renovate, and rent. Or you can buy, renovate, and sell, which is often called flipping.
Yeah, so it's kind of the BRRRR method, where you buy something, renovate it, rent it out, hold it for the long term as well, turn it into a kind of buy and hold, or you flip it, just buy something, do it up, quickly sell it, take the money out. And then what about the development strategy? What are the 2 flavors of that?
So again, you can develop to rent out and hold on to the properties yourself, or you can develop to sell, like a developer like Williams Corporation.
And the cool thing is that we have had people on this podcast who are using all of these different strategies. So if I think about the new build buy and hold strategy, we recently had Di Foster on the show as part of a case study Sunday, and she called that the ultimate lazy investment. I remember her saying she really liked that strategy because she didn't want to have to do anything. She just wanted to buy something, get the benefit of it going up in value, but didn't want to do anything too much with it. Now, existing properties, just buying an existing property and not doing anything to it, we haven't got a photo here of anybody, Andrew. Why is that?
Well, I guess there's fewer people doing that nowadays. I mean, that was how I got into investing in property, but as time has gone on and some of the regulation around existing properties have changed, a lot of people have gone to either buy and renovate or buy new builds.
Yeah, most people aren't just buying an existing property and doing nothing to it. We've had some people on the show, actually. I remember for a case study Sunday, we had Path, and then I think we had a young guy who was investing in, I think it was Masterton and, was it Invercargill? I've got a terrible memory.
I don't remember.
My partner always tells me that. But some people are doing that, not so much. But we've got the renovate to rent, or the BRRRR strategy. You know, who have we had on the show that's doing that?
Okay, well, we had Sanjay and Ice. I remember them coming on the show and talking about that.
Yeah, there were some great Hamilton investors who were investing in New Plymouth and around the place. I know we've also had them on the cover of New Zealand Property Investor magazine. They really wanted to be actively involved, increasing the value of their properties. And I know they went from very, very poor to quite comfortable very quickly through that strategy.
Was that the couple that won the deal when we went into it live?
Yeah, the deal in Hamilton. They were great. If we're talking about flipping, we've had Tig on the show. He and his wife Christina do Demo to Reno, which is a very popular Instagram account, and they're doing that again because he's got some skills. They like to be very hands-on out there, buying properties, quickly selling them. And then remember how we had Michael and Becky on the show?
Yes, I do.
This is where you tell us about them for anybody who doesn't remember that podcast.
Yes, I do. These are the guys that own their property in Wellington, and they were putting the 2 units on the back of theirs to hold on to those for long-term rentals.
Yeah, that's right. And then they're going to rent all 3 out. And then also the develop to sell. Who's doing that?
Oh, Tim and Izzy, some of our favourites, who you might remember from Britain. So what was that show called? Grand Designs.
How do you not remember Grand Designs?
Just give me a minute.
I'm the Prince of Property, but I don't remember some of the most popular TV shows.
And Tim and Izzy have done a lot of work with us in terms of buying renovating, but also developing as well.
Yeah, we had Tim on the show a long time ago, and the interesting thing about those guys is they've been in property for a long time, so they've really built up their wealth, so they've now got the ability to go out, develop properties and sell them, because you need a lot of money to do that. But let's compare the setup costs in order to be able to go out and actually do some of these strategies. Now, if we're thinking about the buy and hold strategy, if you're buying a new build, 20% deposit, you're not going to need to spend anything on renovation and construction costs. And most of the time, you're not going to have to pay a property coach. Most people who deal in the new build space, like ourselves, don't charge a fee. Some people do. I know Positive Real Estate charge about 10 grand for their coaching program. Might have changed a bit since last time I checked. I know Enable Me also charge some coaching fees if you work with them. Existing properties, if you're going to go out and just buy and hold, 35% deposit's what you need. If you're just going to buy and hold it, you're not going to spend money on renovation costs, and usually you're going to work with a real estate agent, so there won't be coaching fees. But how much money am I going to need to use some of these renovation strategies, Andrew?
So you need to have 35% deposit to actually buy the property, but then you're also going to have your renovation or construction budget, which is normally starts at 50 grand, probably goes as high as 100 in some cases. And of course, one of the other big things is if you want to be successful in this, you probably have to get some coaching around it, and that normally costs anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000.
Now, again, paying a property coach is optional, but a lot of the people who we have on the show have either got their experience by paying for it or working really hard and then getting it as a DIY.
You're going to pay for it one way or another, whether or not you pay from a mistake or pay for it with coaching.
Now, development's one some people are often interested in, and it's important to say there are different ways you can do that. So, Michael and Becky have taken the kind of entry-level approach there, where they've got their own house, they've got some land on the back, so they're going to develop a couple of dwellings on there. That's kind of your entry level, whereas Tim and Izzy are buying a plot of land, demolishing the existing property on there, and building 4 to 6 townhouses on there. So how much money do we need to get started if we're doing some of these development strategies?
So I've said about $500,000 if you've already got a site and you're going to put some extra units on it and then rent them out. If you want to actually go and buy a site and develop to sell, you probably need a lot more money. So you probably need to have about $1 million cash to do that.
Usually we say buying the land outright in cash and then going and borrowing some of the other things. Yep. Obviously, the reason develop to rent can be, might not need as much money is that you can borrow against the future value of the properties, right, once they're built.
Yeah, that, and also if you're doing it this way, it's usually a smaller development as well. It might be 2 or 3 units as opposed to 16.
Let's get into tax before we talk about time. If we're thinking about the buy and hold strategies, usually there's not a lot of tax in there. New builds get all of the benefits where you don't have to pay Brightline most of the time because you're holding for the long term. You're not going to pay GST. You get your interest deductibility. The main difference with existing properties is you are going to have to pay more tax through interest deductibility.
I'm just going to add one thing here. I'd probably actually put under Brightline sometimes, because remember, for an existing property, the bright line is 10 years. Now, average time to hold a property in New Zealand, something like 7 or 8 years. So I would say that probably that would be yes or sometimes.
Most of the investors I work with or see usually are holding for more than 10 years, but I take your point.
Okay.
If we're thinking about renovating, this is where it actually gets interesting. So I've said here that usually if you're renovating to hold for the long term, you're usually not going to have to pay Brightline if you hold for 10 years or more. Obviously with flipping, you will always get caught under the Brightline because you're going to buy and sell quickly. Most of the time you're not going to have to pay GST, maybe sometimes with flipping, but most of the time not. And obviously, if you flip, you're not going to get caught through interest deductibility rules because you're not renting out that property over the long term. Whereas if you are renovating, obviously you are going to have to pay more tax through interest deductibility. Happy with those, or want to make any comments?
Well, yeah.
I did give you the opportunity.
I know, but now
I gave you the opportunity before the show to give me comments on this spreadsheet. I prepare these podcasts for you. Now you want to rip me out on the show.
I'd probably say yes to the GST for the flipping as well, because if you're doing enough of a turnover there, that probably triggers that.
Okay. Okay, have it your way, Andrew Nicol. And then why don't you tell us about the tax implications of developing?
So developing, if you're developing,
No, wrong!
if you're developing on your own site, you're probably not going to trigger Brightline. Again, if you're holding for that long term, you're probably not going to trigger GST, and you're probably not going to have to pay through interest deductibility. On the flip side, if you're looking at developing to sell, yes, you're going to pay Brightline. Yes, you're going to pay GST, and interest deductibility doesn't apply because you've sold the properties.
Yeah, one thing that I should mention is I don't know whether if you're developing to sell, whether it's technically Brightline, but what we mean by that is you're going to pay income tax.
Yep.
That's the main thing we're talking about there. Now, talk to us, before we get into the money side of how much you can make, and let me hide that away, because we will talk about the different ways you can make money through these strategies, but talk to us about the time and risk needed for each of these.
So time taken, if you're just doing the new build, buy and hold, probably 10 hours total to get it all set up, and that's pretty much it. If you're buying an existing, a little bit more time, because typically if you're doing this, you're going to actual open homes as opposed to looking at brochures, and people tend to spend more time getting a bit more hands-on. So I put 30 hours there, and these are much lower risk because you're letting time take care of the investment. And
Hide the money they can make, Andrew. We want to reveal it later.
in terms of renovating, if you're going to buy, renovate and hold, you're probably looking at 10 hours a week while you're doing this. And there's a bit of a medium risk here because, again, you can uncover issues with the property when you start renovating.
And when we say 10 hours a week, that's if you're doing a really hands-off investment. Even if you've got builders in there, even if you've got painters in there and you're not doing the work yourself, you're still going to have some active involvement to make sure the work's being done, checking it out, going to site, paying all the bills, those kinds of things. The sky's the limit there. You could spend 60 hours a week on a renovation if you're doing a lot of the work yourselves. And we've said a little bit more for flipping. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, a bit more because you've actually got to find a buyer at the other end as well. And this is much higher risk because, again, you have to find that buyer to pay the premium amount when you go to sell that property.
And similarly, if you can't sell that property quickly, you've potentially got a house that is empty, not getting any rent because you're flipping, trying to sell this thing, and you're still paying interest costs to the bank. So flipping is a higher risk strategy than just renovating to rent out, simply because, again, you've got the benefit of time.
And then if you're talking about adding a property on the back of your existing investment or existing home like Michael and Becky, you're probably looking at 20 hours a week while you're getting that constructed. This is probably really high risk as well because, as we heard with their story, sometimes you have major price blowouts and delays in the construction.
Yeah, was it the extra $500,000 they had to pay in extra construction?
Something horrendous like that.
Yeah,
I remember them saying they were losing sleep and crippled on the bathroom floor and anxiety over it. And then, of course, probably the highest risk and the highest amount of time is developing to sell. Again, you've got extra hours because you have to find that end buyer as well. You're not just holding on to that property.
Even if you're working with real estate agents, it just takes time.
Absolutely. And this is probably the highest risk, highest return that you can possibly have.
Well, speaking of that, let's get into the returns because it's interesting when you actually lay it out. And let's see if you've got extra comments for me here, Andrew. So if we're thinking about the new build strategy, the way you make money is going to be in capital gain, and it's probably somewhere between 5 to 6% that your house is going to go up in value. Same with purchasing an existing property. Now, in terms of instant equity, that's when you buy a property under value or you renovate it to increase it. I've said you're probably not going to get any of that when you're buying and holding. You've got to make money from holding the property over the long term, it going up. And then in terms of the cash flow, if you're borrowing at 100% at today's interest rates, your new build's probably going to cost you $350 to $500 a week if you don't have a cash deposit. If you're doing it through existing, under today's taxes, you're probably looking at $450 to $600 a week. You'd have to top that property up by just to hold on to that. So obviously existing's high because of those taxes. What about if we're renovating properties? How much money can we make there, Andrew?
So again, you get that 5 to 6% capital growth over the long term.
That's if you're renovating to rent it out.
Correct. If you're doing those renovations, you're hoping to get some instant equity as well. So we always say you like to get at least for every dollar you put in, you get $2 back in terms of value add. So there's some ability to get some instant equity there. And normally, if you're getting that cash flow up, you might be putting in $200 to $300 a week after you pay your mortgage and on both the purchase price and the renovation costs, and also those taxes that you've got to pay because it's an existing home.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people forget about today, is actually, even if you're renovating to rent out, often it will still be negatively geared at today's interest rates and in today's tax structure. Now, if you go ahead and decide to flip, you're actually not going to make standard capital gain. And what I mean by that is the market going up in value. You sometimes can get the benefit. Let's say the market's going crazy and you buy a property and 6 months later you sell it again and the market's gone up 10%, but that usually doesn't happen. Most of your gain comes through instant equity. So you spend your 50K on your renovations and your house value goes up by somewhere between 50 and, in extreme cases, call it 200K. So we've said maybe you can make somewhere between 0 and 3 times your renovation cost. I've said sometimes you won't make any money, obviously, if a flip has gone against you. I remember meeting a flipper at a recent Christchurch Property Investors or Canterbury Property Investors event who said he did a flip recently and made no money on it. That's okay. Sometimes you can make a lot of money on it. So there's a bit of a wider range if you're flipping. Obviously, you don't get any cash flow if you're going to flip because you're not getting a tenant in there, you're just buying to sell. And then in terms of making money through developments, Andrew, you're obviously a poster child recently of telling us how maybe you don't make as much, but how much can you make if you develop?
I think if you're developing, and again, you're developing to hold, you obviously get the benefit of the long-term capital growth, but also you'd hope to get some uplift in the actual construction. So 10% is probably a nice number to work on. And then again, you're probably looking at a cash flow loss for the first wee while, usually speaking, because interest rates are high at the moment. If you're developing to sell, your capital growth doesn't apply because, again, you're selling it straight away. Someone else is going to get that long-term capital growth. But again, you'd want instant equity of hopefully 10%. That's probably not an unreasonable margin at the moment, although I am seeing some developers accept 0% at the moment because they just want to get rid of a project. And in terms of cash flow, again, that doesn't apply because that comes out of your costs.
And one thing that I do want to say is, okay, well, who do you talk to if you want to do any of these different strategies? So if you're going to do a standard new build, lazy investment, and you're an investor, probably talking to a property investment company is the right thing to do. So examples of that are obviously us here at Opus Partners, but there are other people too. There's Positive Real Estate. I think I said before, Enable Me do a little bit of that. There are real estate agents if you want to do existing properties. So standard buy and hold with existing property. You know, your Ray White, Bailey's, Harcourts, those are probably the sorts of people you're going to go out and talk to. I know I find property as another person in that space with a real focus on investors. Now, if you're going to do the renovation strategy, if you're renovating to rent, you're going to go talk to a property coaching company if you want some help with that. So examples of that are Property Apprentice. Ilsa's got a new company, Wolf Property Coaching. There are some others that have slipped to my mind. If you're going to go flipping, you're still going to talk to a property coaching company, but you're probably talking to somebody like Asset Lab in Auckland. So you want somebody who's got a real focus on flipping as opposed to the renovating to rent out, because they are different strategies.
Yeah, you usually renovate in a different way as well. If you're renovating to sell, you're probably trying to attract an owner-occupier. If you're renovating to hold, you're attracting a tenant.
And then lastly, if you wanted to go down the development strategy, you're probably talking to a building company. Now, I know that Gilligan Rowan Associates have some content or some sort of development school. I think it's about $700. But then in terms of getting it actually done, you're going to talk to someone like a GJ Gardner, a Keith A. Homes, Nashcroft Homes. There are lots of different building companies out there you possibly could use. Those are just some names to have a wee think about. So those are your 6 property pathways. And the really cool thing is, now that you know what they are, you can pick which one's right for you. So are you like Di, where you want the ultimate lazy investment? Do you want to be more active like Sanjay and Ice or Tig and Christina? Or do you want to go ahead and develop like Michael and Becky did, or Tim and Izzy? So now that you've got the information, hopefully this will help you guys decide which way you want to go down. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you are listening to the audio version and want to check out the video and our spreadsheet, just Google Opus Partners YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Knight.
And I'm Andrew. cool.
We're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.